crazy, but I didn't know he would.
How did it run after that, Cat?
It helped it. It didn't spin as much coming off the turn.
Welcome to another high-octane episode of Southern Dirt Motorsports.
This is Steve Winstead with a very special edition of Southern Dirt Motorsports podcast. In this episode, we're going to be paying tribute to Mr. Gene Wood, who had the terrible accident here. And before anything said, I talked to his son before we ever come down here, and I asked him if he felt comfortable discussing this, and he said yes. He said it was a tragic thing that happened, but he was a happy man at the end. And I told him before we started doing this that he's in total control of this, and I want to pay, as I'm sure you all do, I want to pay respect to Gene Wood and his family, because he was a heck of a driver, and I'd be amiss. It would be negligent of me not to pay honor to Gene with his son here. So we're here at the Sparta Speedway on Oak Hill Road, and our special guest today is Mr. Gene Wood. He is the son of Gene Wood that used to race here. Gene won a lot of races here. I watched him make a lot of laps here. We're standing outside with what used to be turns 3 and 4. Gene, welcome to the program. Glad to have you.
Having me, Steve.
Oh, it's our honor. First of all, how old was your dad when he started driving?
My earliest memories are 1967. That was in Tazewell. So the track in Tazewell is still there. It's the same track. And I remember him having I want to say it was like maybe a 55 Ford or something like that. He was number 28 back then. I don't know what the significance of the 28 was, but I was just a little, I think I was 5 years old, but had an old Studebaker truck, a 1-ton Studebaker truck that had cattle racks on the side of it, and in order to load the car up, we'd have to find an embankment. So there was an embankment at the Tazewell track, so that's how we loaded it and unloaded the car. But I remember the old Studebaker truck. It was like it was a rust bucket, and
You have to take the stock racks off to fit the car in here.
no, they had these. They had these old. Dad was in the furniture business, so he had these old rough cut lumber boards that they used to load the truck up, and they were. I couldn't even lift them up; they were so heavy. But I would ride in the center of the truck. He had another guy that helped him. His name was Dwayne Epperson, and when we would drive the truck, I would ride in the middle, and I would shift the gears. Dad would tell me when to shift the gears on the truck. I want to say it was a 3-speed, but
early version of automatic transmission.
yeah, exactly. But it was an old Studebaker truck, 1-ton, and I remember going to Tazewell, and a lot of the cars there were the old like the Cat Styles type cars, like a 34 Ford sedan and coupes and things like that. He had that Ford. But even back then, as a young guy, I would say he was probably in his 20s back then, mid to late 20s, and he ran good back then. That was Tazewell, and then we moved from Tazewell to Livingston, Tennessee, and of course, Livingston you had Hillham Speedway, and of course I was a bit older then, but I remember going there. I think they raced on Friday nights, and that's where we went on Friday nights. And, a lot of really good drivers back then at that track. We were talking about it earlier. I mean, it's like the who's who back then of dirt track drivers. You had Bobby Dale, Jerry McLaren, David Tays, Fireball Watson, Dad, Fred Flatt. And I'm sure I'm missing a lot of guys.
Gabe Sales.
Yeah, Gabe Sales. I mean, a lot of really good drivers back then. So you put all those guys in a feature race. I mean, it's a flip of the coin to see who would win, because there's a lot of talent. But my earliest memories of him racing were in Tazewell. guys that a lot of people that Billy Ogle Jr., his dad raced there. They were from Tazewell, Tennessee, and that he was like the top dog. So if you wanted to win, you had to beat Bill Ogle Sr. And there was this guy named, I never will forget this. His name was Bill Bell. That's what he had an auto parts store right outside the racetrack. And it was so funny. I would catch myself just sitting there staring at the guy because he wore this bright white fire suit. And he looked like the Red Beard. He had the scarf around his neck and his goggles. And when he would get done with the race, he'd walk around and you'd see all the whites around his eyes and everything else was like pitch black. So they were, of course, they raced with the open face helmets back then. But, those are my earliest memories when he started racing. But I know that he was always into hot rods. Every picture that I have of him when he was younger, some kind of rat rod. There was one picture of him with a go-kart that had two chainsaw engines on it, and he would load it in his trunk of his car and take it up to the squares, North Carolina, and do the square up and get the cops to chase him, and then load it up and go back home. But yeah, he was a motorhead. You always had to have something that went fast.
Yeah. Where all did he race at? I know it had to be all over the Southeast.
Yeah, they, there in 1977, which was the last year that he raced, he primarily raced here at Sparta because BK Luna was the owner of the track, and BK wanted to. I remember BK coming to the Sears store in Gainesboro. It was like on a Thursday night or something like that. They were working on the car, and he said, "Gene, I really need you at the track." He goes, "When you're there, the stands are full. When you're not there, they're half full." And a lot of people don't realize this, but they paid him an appearance fee to be here, and that's why he was in the runnings for the Points Championship in 1977 because he was here for every race. Yeah, and he and BK had a good relationship. They were both race car drivers. They understood what it took to win, and I think Dad had a lot of respect for BK, and I know BK had a lot of respect for Dad. So out of Dad's respect for BK, he decided in 1977 that when they were racing here, they were going to be here. But they went other places too. Buffalo Valley, Clarksville, a couple places up in Kentucky that we used to go to, La Follette, Winchester, McMinnville. Some places down in a couple places down in Alabama that they went to. I remember going to a little bull ring somewhere down in North Georgia, in the middle of nowhere. Never been there before, never saw the track. Then we go down there and we win the heat race and start in the back. Somehow they stuck us in the back of the feature and came back and won the feature. And but that was the fun of it with Houston. Houston Montgomery and Dad. They were a good match. Dad was good at communicating to Houston, what he needed to make the car turn. And Houston was a genius when it came to a race car. I mean, he was the ultimate motorhead. And you hear a lot about Montgomery engineering. He didn't have an engineering degree. He was just a smart guy. If you had Houston in your pit stall, you had a pretty good chance of winning. So,
well, how did Gene and Houston get together? How did they?
Well, this is, of course, they raced, or Lynn Slager drove for Houston. I think Lynn would go back and forth between Bobby Ballou and Houston. And something happened. This happened at Hillham Speedway. Dad broke one night. He had an old Ford Falcon. Broke one night, and I don't know what the deal was with Lynn. Lynn couldn't drive or got hurt. I don't remember. But Houston asked Dad to drive the car, the 3-car. And they did pretty good. They may have won. I don't know. I just remember it. And after that, I think Lynn may have gone back to, either Lynn went back to Bobby Ballou, or I think Lynn was driving a truck or something. Maybe he said, "Hey, I can't race anymore." But that's how they got together. And at that time, it was Dad and Bill Speck. Bill Speck owned the Sears catalog store in Livingston. Mm-hmm. and they had like 4 guys that helped them out. And the only place they ran was at Hillham at the time. And I remember Houston coming over. Houston was all, dressed up as Houston could get dressed up. And, I was just a little kid back then, but I remember them talking, and part of the deal was they wanted Houston to, they wanted to join teams.
Mm-hmm.
And the one stipulation or 2 stipulations that Houston had was they're going to run Chevrolet motors and had to have the number 3 on the car. And that was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
A no-brainer at all. Even though Dad was, and I told you this earlier, Dad was always a Ford guy. Always a Ford guy. I mean, all the pictures that you see of him, even his old cars, were all Ford. So that was a big jump for him.
Yeah.
To Chevrolet. It was a good jump because, Houston could get the most out of a little small block Chevy. So that's how they got together. I just don't know why, Lynn left Houston. I don't know why, but Lynn was a good driver, very good driver.
Didn't Houston have a shop up in Livingston?
I don't remember him having a shop. Dad had a race shop there.
Okay.
And that's where they it was out by close to the old bowling alley, or there was an old motel there where you split to go to Birdstown.
Yeah, over
and
the
the
motel, I think.
Yeah, if you go right, you go to I think
Jamestown?
Allen's.
Yeah,
Allen's.
Yeah.
And he had a little race shop right there. So that's where they built all their race cars and everything. And when that's actually where they had their meeting when they met with Houston to join up. And I remember them shaking hands. I remember Houston leaving, and I was tearing apart a carburetor, out by the garage. And Houston used to always call me and my buddies flop-eared hippies. What do you flop-eared hippies into?
Why'd he do that?
I don't know. I'm talking to some other people that said something like flop-eared hippie. I don't know. I liked it.
What favorite track that you had?
Well, I know that he really liked Buffalo Valley. Atomic was another one that I left out. When they would go to Atomic and race with the big boys, they always ran pretty good. But he liked Atomic. He thought it was a really fast track. Both ends of the track were very similar, where, all the other tracks you go to, you got to find a balance with the car because no 2 corners are the same.
Mm-hmm.
But he always ran well at Atomic when they went up there. And of course, you're racing with the big boys that have, a lot more money and a lot more motor and a lot more car. And that's another thing. They never, as far as a Chevrolet motor, when Houston and Dad got together, they never had a motor that was balanced and blueprinted. Houston built all the motors. Now, they would have some machine work done to it, but, bore the motor out a little bit or do some, angle milling on the heads. But other than that, they didn't have a big, power plant underneath the hood. Houston was very good with setting up the cars, building the cars. They built all their own cars. And Houston was very good at understanding the geometry of the car and the balance of the car.
Right.
And then, of course, Dad was good with communicating back to Houston what he needed to make the car turn. So, but yeah, they would go race with the big boys that had, engine builders and everything else. It wasn't unusual for us to go to a track we'd never been to before and win. So, a lot of times you have guys that are really good. They're the local top dog, but they're just good at that one track. They can't go somewhere else and win. They won a lot of races at other tracks. So,
of course, drivers back in the day, they had their little interpretation of the rule book, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Did Gene and Houston have that in?
I don't think so, because there really weren't a lot of rules.
Right.
There really weren't a lot, and if there were, I don't remember where it was. There was somewhere, and they won a race. It was a racetrack that they had not raced at, and there were some engine rules. And I remember they tore them down, and they were legal. So the guy that had them tore down was the top dog at the track. He won every week, so he wasn't too happy about somebody that never been there before coming in and taking the purse money. But I really don't think there were a lot of rules. I don't think I ever saw a rule book. because I remember one car they had, it had a 429 tunnel port Ford engine in it. This was back before Dad got with Houston. This thing was a hog leg. It was a monster. So I couldn't imagine with having that kind of motor in a car that, you know, they would have any type of
all that extra weight in the front, wouldn't it hard to get the car to balance?
It would. They didn't keep the motor in there very long at all. They put it in there and went up to Atomic to run. And Dad told Houston, or told Bill Speck. He said it was Bill Speck's idea to put this motor in the car, and he said that's way too much motor. When I can't stay in the throttle going down the straightaway because it wants to spin out on me. So they just, you know, it's just like the motors today. It's just a different version. Most of those motors that they built, they were designed like short stroke, big bore motors, you know, for short tracks. Yeah.
RPM.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, Gene, he was quite a driver. I never had the privilege to meet him, but he could sure wheel one. And I understand that you raced some too.
I did. I got into it in I think around 99, 2000, and got out of it around 2009, right after the Mountain crash. And as I was telling you earlier, I was, you know, I was crazy.
Tell that story again.
Well, that's
too funny not to repeat.
Well, if I had to do over again, it would be different. But I went straight into a super late model. Mm-hmm. Had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, shoot, I can drive the car down the road. I can drive a super late model. But I remember the first time that I went out in the car, it was on a practice night down in Jacksonville, Florida, and I mean, it didn't take me but about 30 seconds once I started going down the back straightaway, because this was a big track. It was a half-mile D-shaped oval. It was more like an oil-clayed surface, almost like asphalt.
Yeah.
But I remember going into turn 4. I'm like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? This is dangerous. You know, I could get hurt in this thing. You know, I think I made a bad decision. But as time, it was probably maybe a month later, there was this guy down in, I think it was Port Orange, Florida. His name was Duke Southard. He had a racing school down there. He was a legend down there in that area of Florida on short asphalt tracks. And he had this little racing school, and it was a week long. So I had this car, and I mean, it had the best of everything on it, and didn't know how to drive it, but I had it. And I went down to this school. The first 2 days of the school were in class, learning the geometry of the car and balancing the car, weighing the car, you know, getting bite in the car and all that stuff. And didn't really learn a lot, but because I was focused on getting on the track, because Thursday we were going to the track. That was my focus. I didn't need school. I just wanted to get to the track. And Wednesday we brought the cars into his race shop, and everybody unloaded their cars, and he had to inspect all the cars before they go on the track on Thursday. And he comes out, and he was this big old burly guy, and he didn't say much, and he was very blunt and to the point. And he's looking at everybody's car, and then I'm over there. A buddy of mine from up in Cookville came down for me and helped me that week at the school, and he's looking at my car, and I'm waiting on him to say something, and he's just looking around, you know, and he was shaking his head like this, looking at the car. And I'm like, oh man, what's wrong? You know, he's not going to let me go on the track.
And
what's wrong with the car?
And you was getting nervous.
Yeah, I was getting nervous. So he left, and he didn't say anything. He didn't say one word to me. And so we go back after lunch, we go back in the classroom, and he starts talking about everybody's car, what he noticed and all this other stuff. And he's gone through just like almost everybody in the class. And I'm like, man, he forgot about me. You know, he forgot about looking at my car. And about that time, he looks up and he points at me and he says, and you have no business in that car. It was so funny. He said, that's a car that a 20-year veteran would be out there driving. You have no business in that car. But he was right. The next day we went out to the track, and it was just real bad track conditions. They got way too wet and just spinning all over the place. But it was a pretty sharp learning curve for me. I got in and I said, hey, I've spent all this money. I might as well get the best out of it. And I started racing and started winning a little bit. It was a lot of fun. So the funny thing about that is that I did not know how my dad would react to it if he knew that I was racing after knowing what he went through.
Right.
So I kept it from him. And I didn't tell him, but man, it killed me because I wanted to talk to him about it. You know, I had questions. And finally, he found out.
Through the grapevine.
Well, I'd won a race, and there was like this little regional racing publication, and there was a story in there, and he just happened to be a subscriber to that magazine. And I got a phone call, and he goes, "You got something you want to tell me?" And I'm like, "What?" "No, what?"
I don't know what you're talking about.
"Yeah, what?" And he said, "Well, guess what I'm reading right here." And he starts going down. I'm like, "Oh man, I'm busted. I am busted." And I thought he was going to be really upset, you know. And I just overthunk the whole thing. And the only thing he said to me was, he says, "You better have good insurance," is what he said. And I said, "Well, I do." And then after that, you know, we talked almost every day, because if you're going to run up front and you're going to be competitive in a race car, you got to work on that thing. As soon as you get back from the track on a Saturday night or a Friday night, you're working on the car to get faster, because it's all about going faster. Each time that you go out, going faster.
It's not just a one-day thing, it's 7 days a week thing.
No, the guys that are running in the back are the guys that unload it Sunday, and they don't touch it again until Friday.
Right.
Those are the guys that run in back. The guys that run up front, Monday morning or Sunday, they're back on the car. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time and effort to run up front. I learned a lot. What I did find out in the racing community, there are a lot of really good people. Most of my really good friends I met, you know, in the racing community. And, you know, everybody wants to help one another. But the best advice that he gave me, because I remember when I first got in the car, everything happened so fast. And, you know, in these cars now, you got these cockpits, you're wedged in there, and, you know, you're almost claustrophobic, and everything happens so fast. And I was telling Dad about that. He goes, "Listen," he said, "slow down. You got to slow everything down in the cockpit. Once you slow everything down in the cockpit, you can go fast. Don't overreact."
Got to slow down to go fast.
Exactly. And I remember one time I went up you know, he was living up in North Carolina, and there was this track called in Lawndale, North Carolina, big high bank red clay track right down they cut it down in the bottom of a hole, and real fast track. And we were parked up on the bank, and the whole time he said, "Watch that guy. Watch his hands." You know, you got a guy there that's constantly, you know, fighting the wheel. He's not going fast. Those guys are just nice and smooth. That's what he said. He said, "Watch his hands."
Getting that rhythm when it's nice.
Yeah. So I learned a lot from him, and you know, especially the technology, of course, had changed a lot. The technology was nothing like it was back when they used to race. As a matter of fact, I think he was one of the first drivers in the area that had a quick change rear end in their car. So, you know, that was new technology to them. I remember one time they bought, I want to say it was Crash Bond. He had an asphalt car that he raced down in Nashville, had a windshield in it. It was a big old huge Ford. And I remember when they brought it in, and they learned a lot about building a race car just by that car, looking at that car, because you could adjust all four corners. You know, had jack springs on all four corners. So they learned a lot. And, you know, the sport just kept evolving. And even in 1977, you know, the cars were starting to evolve, where you had chassis builders like C.J. Rayburn, you had engine builders that were building engines specifically for certain tracks. So times had changed. It would have been fun to see him in a modern day late model. That would have been a lot of fun.
Did your dad ever get to see you racing?
No,
I didn't think he did.
He started, his health started to fail. Well, he passed in 2004, so I was getting into the groove around 2002, 2003. Right. So he wanted to, but you know, it just didn't happen.
What kind of gear did run like down here at Sparta? I know Gene had the quick change rear end. Do you know what kind of gear setup he run?
I don't know. I remember my job was to make sure the gearbox was on the trailer when we or in the truck when we left. That was one of my jobs, that and washing the tools. But I don't remember. It looks to me like this track may have been, you know, maybe a 3/8. I mean, just by looking at it, I'm thinking
it was
maybe
a 3/8.
Yeah. So, but yeah. I don't remember. I just remember they won a lot of races here in 1976 and 1975, 76, 77. They started winning a lot of races. I mean, you know, they would go someplace and win the heat race. They would have a double feature that night. They would win both features. And if they didn't break, they won. And a lot of good drivers, you know, in this area. A lot of really good drivers in this area.
What were some of the drivers he run against in this area that you remember?
Well, I remember here, you know, because BK, I think, was a promoter at the time. I want to say Doug Sofa drove his car. So Doug was a competitor. Fred Flatt was always a competitor at Hillham, Buffalo Valley here, Chester Albright,
Earl
Lawrence, Dwayne McBroom, Jack Smith, Lynn Sliger. I mean, I could go on. If I left anybody out, I apologize, because there were a lot of really good drivers in this area. A lot of the drivers that were at Buffalo Valley didn't, you know, make the jump either, or at Hillham didn't make the jump to Buffalo Valley or Sparta. Right. So I remember, we were talking earlier, I remember the first time that Jeff Purvis came up to Buffalo Valley. Came up in a little Chevy 2 Nova, and I told you that was the first time that I ever saw a dry sump motor. I didn't know what it was. I had to ask what it was. What are those two big oil filters on the dash? What are those for? You know, but he was definitely a hot shoe, and but you know, thinking back, I mean, like at Buffalo Valley, Fred Flatt was a big competitor of Dad's. He raced with Fred. Fred had Jerry, Gary, and of course I think Lewis was Fred's dad's name. They were a big racing family, so he was a big competitor. Dwayne McBroom, Ed and Ken Houston, Billy Hill.
Yeah,
Billy Hill earlier.
Yeah,
and they raced a lot down in McMinnville too. I actually have I posted it on one of the racetrack memories. I have an ounce of silver with Dad's name on it that was given to him for fast qualifier.
I think that's McMinnville.
Yeah, that was at McMinnville. Yeah, it was.
I think it's on the McMinnville page.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we won a lot at McMinnville, you know, and they had some good drivers down there too. You know, Randall Davis was another one that I think in 1977 it was Dad and Randall that were neck to neck for the points title here. But a lot of great drivers, man. If I left anybody out, like I said, I apologize, because there were so many good ones. I always liked Julius Todd because I liked his color of his car, you know, his orange and white.
Yeah, UT color.
Yeah, UT color. So I like Julius Todd, even though I think he may have ran in hobby. I don't know if Julius ever ran in what they called sportsman. Today it's late model.
Yeah.
But back then it was called sportsman, and some places called it modified. So,
Julius was a smooth operator, smooth driver.
Yeah, he could drive. I like Julius Todd. So, but I also, another story about this place, I remember they had a big race here, and all the big boys from Atomic came in here. Thought they were going to come in and steal the purse. And I think Dad almost lapped the entire field. And most of the cars that were in the top 5 were local drivers that raced here at Sparta. And you had these big boys that from Atomic that came down here. Billy Palmer was another one. I remember when Billy came to, I don't know if it was Sparta or Buffalo Valley. Billy lived in, he's still racing today, by the way. He said he races at Spring City. Billy was a really good guy. Dad befriended him because Billy was a little bit younger, took him in. Yeah. Billy would come in early, sometimes on Friday night or early Saturday morning, come down to the Sears store in Gainesboro and work on their car. And Dad and Houston were real good about helping people. You know, they're just real generous guys. And I think they had a lot of friends. I don't think they had a lot of enemies, but they were real good about helping guys.
We're heading towards turn 1. And I'm going to let Gene here, his son, kind of talk and say kind of what he wants to, kind of what he feels.
Well, it just, you know, I remember it was Labor Day weekend 1977, and they were heading off into turn 1. And, you know, there's a lot of stories out there on what happened, but basically what happened, it was a racing accident. went off the track here after going into turn 1. I just remember the car flipping end over end. And I think what happened is once the car came down, it went airborne, and the nose went down into a little ditch area and caused like a catapult type effect, flipping the car over. Went through a barbed wire fence. I remember looking at the car the following Monday, and there was barbed wire just all in the car. But the results of the crash, of course, he was taken to the hospital here in Sparta, and they immediately transported him to Baptist in Nashville, where he stayed for quite a while. But it broke his back in 4 places. He had other injuries as well. He had a real bad laceration on his left elbow, but the major injury was the broken back. It didn't sever his spine, but he had trauma to his spine. Initially, when he got to Baptist, he was paralyzed from his waist down, no feeling, no movement in any of his lower extremities. But he had several surgeries. They had to put an 8-inch stainless steel rod in his back to stabilize his spine. And I don't remember how long he was in Baptist, but it seemed like he was in there for a long time, because we would go down on the weekends and spend the weekends down there when he was in the hospital. He eventually, when he got out, my parents divorced, and he moved to Marshtown, Tennessee, which is in East Tennessee in Hamlin County. That's where his parents lived. And he immediately went into rehab, physical therapy rehab, worked his butt off, and he was able to eventually walk with a walker. And he could not move or feel his left leg, but he could move his right leg to a certain extent with his hip, but he couldn't feel it, and he had drop foot in both feet. But with the extent of the injuries he had, it was miraculous that he could even walk with a walker. And then he started driving, and he drove without any type of hand controls. He drove just like you and I would drive, without the aid of any hand controls. I've never seen anybody work so hard with physical therapy, because he always said, one day I'm going to walk again. One day I'm going to walk again. And he got really involved. He started this group in Morristown, Tennessee called Lakeway United. And what they would do is they would go around, they would build like wheelchair ramps and do things for handicapped people. And he was involved with, raising, money to build the decks and stuff like that. He really enjoyed doing that. I only remember him coming back here one time, and that BK had asked him to come back. And I remember we pulled up, and he didn't say anything. Didn't say a word. He was real quiet, and they gave him this black jacket with, I never will forget, I guess it was because the car was black and yellow. They gave him this black sports jacket that had like Sparta Speedway 1977 points champion and then his name on it. So they presented him that, and that was the last time that he ever, or the first time he'd been back to the track since 1977, and I don't think he ever came back. But I know that he didn't have any regrets whatsoever. If knowing what happened to him, he would have jumped back in a race car in a heartbeat and not even thought twice about it. He loved the sport. He loved to go fast. He had, he had a love for this track here at Sparta.
Mm-hmm.
He really liked it. And he went fast, won a lot of races here, a lot of races. And we had talked earlier in the podcast about going to this track in North Carolina at Lawndale, and he just, I think he had enough time behind him where he could actually enjoy watching the races, and he still wanted to be out there, but he was able to watch and have fun. But you know, it's like I was telling Steve, it was a tragic event in our life, you know, for my sisters and my mom and I, but, you know, he met someone later on in life. She was an angel. She was a trauma room nurse in Rutherford College, North Carolina. They knew one another in high school, and you know, they fell in love, got married, and that was the best thing ever happened to him. She took really good care of him. They wound up. He had, he had like 40 acres or something there in North Carolina. Had 2 4-wheelers, Honda 4-Trax 4-wheelers. I call her my stepmother, Mom Alice. She would put him on the 4-wheelers every morning, and he would ride all day long. He would come home for lunch, sit on the 4-wheeler, eat his lunch, and go off again. And I remember going up there to visit him one time, and he asked me if I wanted to go for a ride. So I hopped on. I wasn't thinking about it, but I jumped on the back of him on this 4-wheeler, and I've never been so scared in my life. The way he was riding this thing, and keep in mind, this guy was paralyzed, and he's driving this thing like a madman. And you know, he was he passed away in 2004. He was happy. He had no regrets. He was very, very humble.
Never blamed no one.
Never blamed anyone. Never ever blamed anyone. You know, it's, you know, when you climb in that race car and you strap that harness on, I mean, you made that decision. Nobody forced you to get in there. It was just a tragic event. It was an accident. You know, I would love to have seen him in, you know, some of the more modern equipment. But, you know, if he were still alive today, I think he would be like 83 maybe, or something like that. But yeah, and it's been 40 plus years since this accident. So there's, you know, I'm happy because I know that he was in a real good place in life. You know, it took a long time to get there, you know, with all the, with everything that he had gone through. But I can tell you this, and even the doctors said this, they said with the extent of the injuries that he had, there was no way that he should have been doing the things that he was doing.
Just determination.
Yeah, just unbelievable. And I remember when he moved to Marstown, he and his sister had opened up a Montgomery Ward store, and it was on a Saturday, and I'm out in the front of the store. They had like TVs and appliances and things like that, and he came walking out there with his walker, and he goes, "Watch this," and he moves the walker to the side, and it took him a long time to do it, but he walked like 4 steps and stopped and said, "Here, hand me my walker." He said, "I told you I'd walk again."
Wow. Determination.
Yeah. So yeah, he was in a good place when he passed away. We miss him dearly. He was a great guy. He was a good father. So that's the story.
Well, you know, I was sitting here thinking, Gene, let's take one last lap around the track.
Let's do it.
Gonna have to go to the right a little bit. Going into turn 1 here, you can see a little bit of a ditch.
What is that, a gully?
Yeah. Yeah, right there's that sinkhole.
Ooh. So did they bring a dozer in here and doze the tops of the...
Yeah, I reckon they leveled it. I actually got a little above turn 1 on account of having to get around that. This right here is 2 now. Gene run a many a lap around here.
Yeah.
Person had $1 every time he run a lap. He'd have a lot of dollars in his pocket, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Going down the back stretch. Might be off a little bit, but I'm pretty close, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
And again, I want to thank Ed and Casario and his wife for allowing us to do this. They're great people. He told me that, and when I come down here and done my first one, that he didn't know what he's buying until one of his neighbors told him. And just like I told him, I said, you didn't only buy land, you bought a lot of history that come with it for free. So we're going out of turn 3.
This was the place to be on Saturday night.
Yeah, and right up there, you said where your dad parked at.
Yep. I want to say the payout window was right, the little building was right to the left of that pine
Yeah, it
tree
seemed
right
like it
there.
was. Come think of it, man. Yeah, come out of turn 4. Good thing that gully's there. We might do a hot lap around this
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.